Have you ever noticed signs in shitty neighborhoods offering to buy homes no matter how crappy they are? I work for one of the outfits doing that. We offer to buy homes in areas where people couldn't possibly afford them to begin with. South Florida is filled to the brim with shitty real estate, absurd poverty, and get-rich-quick schemes. So we make a comfortable home in West Palm Beach. The general idea is, sometimes we buy the place to be fixed up, but sometimes we could sell it under a contract for a deed, where the buyer lacks any equity at all until the bill is paid in full and we charge whatever interest rate we need to make sure they can't do that. Then they get evicted, usually in less than a year. So Jim, my fat redneck coworker, and I were on the way to our new target, Ms. Aubrey Winters. She had looked us up instead of getting one of the cold calls from the telemarketing room our company used. So Jim was thrilled. I took the call myself, and she sounded like an old lady that was almost too sick to talk, and I felt instantly bad. He took my '97 Lincoln Mark 8, while he tried to talk me down from the teal and black paint job it clearly deserved, and joked about how few junkies seemed to be early risers. Bright orange trucks and muscle cars were the only way to go for him. Some old lady in Riviera Beach, the part of Palm Beach where black people used to be legally segregated into, and are now only unofficially segregated into, was selling her place to us and wanted us to show up way too early in the morning to see it. Our boss, another richer redneck named Brandon, had seen it and planned to do the whole contract for deed bit using a dummy corporation under Jim's name. I wouldn't let him use mine. Jim had gotten dressed in his nicest black polo, which stretched horribly across his beer belly, making him look like a water mammal. In a shitty part of town with no jobs, intentionally horrible schools, and limited access to public transportation, Riviera Beach is so close to Florida's stunning coast that real estate developers have, on more than one occasion, raided the place and turned massive swaths of neighborhoods into upscale developments, evicting the natives without a single fuck given. It wasn't even morning when we got to the place. The sun was busy making slashes of nuclear pink, purple, and orange across the jet black sky. Jim was chugging Mountain Dew mixed with crack tongue. He's an opiate addict, like most rednecks, while trying to convince me that the new LS series from Chevy was going to put America on the automotive map again. Out of the blue-black silhouettes of houses, what appeared to be a crackhead shot out from between some of the many cars covering both sides of the street and into the lawn we were targeting, causing me to swerve and get into a fender bender with a permanently parked '80s Toyota hatchback with no license plate and 2 missing wheels. For a second, it looked like he was moonwalking, but very quickly. Whoever it was, they seemed to head into the lawn of Mrs. Winters, who we were about to talk to, so we had reason to worry. Son of a fucking bitch! Jim looked at me as if I just suggested raping his dad before lunch. I told him that I didn't see the guy before he ran out, and he exited the vehicle telling me to deal with it in his typical fashion. I parked my car and left my phone number and name on a card in the window of the Toyota, hoping whoever owned the car wouldn't feel the need to follow up. They didn't. I looked to the side of our Mark's lawn and saw someone facing me in the dark, but I was pretty distracted by the lawn that I now noticed was immaculate. In fact, the home was gorgeous. It had bright orange paint and turquoise trim. The stones leading up to the door were immersed in perfect vivid green lawn, visible even in the dark, and there was a fake water pump for a lawn ornament that somehow didn't look tacky. Now, Jim thought he was slick shit, especially around black people, who he assumed were too stupid to realize how stupid he was. So I decided not to interrupt what I hoped was a pitiful attempt to swindle what sounded like a sweet old lady. I stayed in the car and vaped some CBD oil that had tons of synthetic cannabinoids in it. I could see City Place behind us, and I was thinking about which pretentious restaurant would make the best breakfast. The worst parts of town border an area called City Place, which is a luxurious shopping and condo center, with plenty of craft breweries and tapas restaurants that sell food on things that aren't even plates. The homes are perfect for flipping, usually being CBS, concrete block construction. Standard in Florida and almost impossible to destroy or significantly damage. Homes with bright colors for paint and metal bars for windows. The only difference between really nice neighborhoods and the really bad ones at night are the lawns, cars, and whether they needed window bars in many areas. Although McMansions have also become popular. It's pretty typical for any part of Florida. I couldn't tell you how long I sat there. My morning dose of NyQuil was already kicking in. Eventually, Jim and an elderly black woman, who at one point in her life had clearly been a stunner, walked out of the house laughing. She wore a neat baby blue pantsuit and gave him a very long hug and a kiss on the cheek, and then handed him a stack of papers and went back inside, all while keeping me in the corner of her eye. I thought she might have already signed, but realized he had left his bullshit contract in the car. Jim hopped into my car and slapped my dashboard, as he apparently learned everything about etiquette from the same inbred parent that told him chewing tobacco was cool. I am that much closer to that fishing boat. He took a moment to pronounce that much and closer as clearly as he could while using his thumb and finger to show me how financially successful he would be if he didn't spend the money on painkillers. I was mainly worried about the fact that he suddenly reeked of smoke and was going to make my car smell, but reminded myself that I could get it detailed at the body shop. Confusing my silence for interest in his life, Jim went on to explain how the lady just loved him and probably wanted to do him. But he didn't have a real contract just yet. She wanted him to sign a contract first, saying that he would come by for several inspections because she was worried he wouldn't be happy with the deal. Despite my job, I don't know a lot about real estate law, and that made no sense to me at all. Most of the people that called us were desperate, and even though their end of the deal was legit, they usually realized they were getting screwed over by us. Jim attempted to calm my worries by telling me that he was clearly a professional, and she was just worried about lawyers and shit. Before taking a drop of etazolum, I had ordered off Alphabet. Before pulling out, I noticed that there were now 2 people standing off to the side of the home, in the dark, watching us closely. I silently prayed to the god of junkies that we were going to get jumped for screwing this old lady over. I didn't tell Jim about it, because otherwise he'd get paranoid about cops and lawyers himself. We headed to City Place for a douchebag's breakfast at some new sushi joint that was already doing weird themed nights, a sign of its impending demise. We considered it a job well done, and I went back to the office, which was a cheap strip mall-based spot where we had to do drugs in the back to keep it looking professional. Brandon took Jim into his office to congratulate him, but seemed furious when Jim showed him the paperwork the lady had drummed up. He called the old lady up, and they left the office to me while he drove to her so they could sweeten her up a bit. Apparently, she was delighted to hear from us twice in one day. For a brief moment, a part of me thought of how she just might be a lonely old woman. She was still beautiful, but was probably the object of every man's attention when she was younger. I desperately didn't want to think about how it would feel as a human being, older, neglected, and desperate for human contact, to look back on such beautiful years. She was so old, she couldn't have had it easy when she was growing up. South Florida is still pretty bad in the racism category, and I had a brief thought of how she might have had a lot of potential and happiness stolen from her. Sometimes, I was glad I was born ugly, inside and out. I tried to get that part to shut up, with more Edizolum, vodka, and real weed. I passed out sometime before noon on a couch in Brandon's office. I woke up to someone knocking on the door. I smelled a horrible burning smell, like someone lit a turd on fire or something. I opened the door and gasped as a tall black guy in a scorched hoodie grabbed me by the shoulders and screamed something incomprehensible. His eyes were missing, and in their place were empty, bleeding sockets. A lot of his skin was burned off, especially around his chest and arms. His breath smelled like 100 rotting teeth and made me gag and gasp for air instead of trying to calm him down. I tried to push him off me, but he had a stronger grip on me than my own addictions. I felt myself being dragged forward as he screamed gibberish again. He was moving backwards, and I was going with him, whether I liked it or not. I tried to hold on to the frame of the door, but it was no use. As I lost my grip, he seemed to tighten his legs moving desperately towards me, but for some reason carrying us both backwards, like he was being sucked into a black hole I couldn't see. I screamed for help as we crossed Brandon's hall, and then lost my footing, landing face first into the man's chest and getting a big breath of carrion. "Wake the fuck up, man!" Suddenly, it wasn't some sick guy's face or incoherent gibberish getting up and close and personal, but it felt more disturbing as I woke up. I could still smell smoke, but it seemed to be coming from my coworkers. Brandon's fat pink face loomed above me, with Jim's equally fat and pink face behind him. Both were drinking who knows what out of big gulps and wearing standard issue aviators. But I could tell the difference between them because Brandon actually looked genuinely clean and well dressed. He was much more intelligent as well, and had actually graduated from college, but had only used his inheritance money to start scam after scam so that he wouldn't have to work in a normal office somewhere. He'd probably be a pretty alright guy to know if he weren't a scumbag like me. "You being productive, bro?" Brandon jeered in my face, causing Jim to chuckle briefly. I lied and told him I had gotten a guy to take interest in a spot in Lake Worth we had just reclaimed, which was true, but it happened 2 days earlier. Brandon nodded his approval when I brought him the mortgage application. Jim looked saddened. I asked him how it went, and this time, Brandon seemed thrilled with the whole multiple appointments to look the place over. Specifically, the old woman said she wanted them to see the roof and check the AC unit before committing to sell the house. Which, despite never having heard of that kind of a contract before, Brandon seemed to think was perfectly normal. Jim busted out his very best racist jokes while explaining the whole thing again, before we all went back to our typical day. Jim had lost his license a couple weeks prior, so I ended up driving him home again, despite it being Brandon's turn for the last 6 times. He asked if we could hit up Tacos al Carbon on the way, and I was relieved to finally hear a good idea from him. I wondered how a guy so constipated from constant opiate use could eat so much, as he talked about all the cool stuff he was going to buy in the near and distant future. He must have been really loaded, because he was slurring every now and then by the time we got to the restaurant, He tried to pick a fight with some illegal who was wearing a nice button-down shirt and driving a new Miata, but the guy just laughed at him. I wish I were joking or exaggerating, but this was my real-life coworker, every single fucking day. The next day, I got to work a little early and felt a bit of pep in my step. Jim called me and told me he was being dropped off by his neighbor, a skeezy little dope dealer who recently died while drunk driving, named John Cawley, who genuinely thought ICP was pretty cool. Fucking Florida. This inevitably meant that Jim owed John some money, and he was hoping Brandon would write him a check. Brandon was never absurdly late, but I figured I probably had half an hour of peace and quiet where I could blare reggae if I could get my Bluetooth headphones to work. 10 minutes before we were supposed to open, the phone at Jim's desk began to ring. National Home Sales Bureau, how may I direct your call? I heard a musical chuckle on the other end of the line, letting me know instantly that someone wasn't buying my bullshit. I assumed it was one of our friends before, remembering we generally didn't have many of those. Leave a message for Jim for me. A deep, sexy voice cajoled. I said of course, baffled as to who it might be, when she told me it was Miss Winters, and that she was hoping my 2 co-workers could make time for her again today. And despite her age, her voice would put any telephone sex operator to shame, and I think I heard real singing potential too. I guess that she had gotten over whatever flu she was suffering from previously. I was quiet for a moment as I chewed on my deep self-hatred before her rich voice told me she was eager to sell the home so that she wouldn't miss another mortgage payment. This furthered my already powerful self-loathing, and I prepared a shot of drugs for myself at Jim's desk as I told her I would be happy to. She asked me if I would like to see the place as well, but that was just a bit too much for me. I just couldn't force the question of where she would live afterwards out of my head, so I declined. More for the scavengers of dead happiness that I worked with, Jim would be delighted to borrow my car. As I got up from the desk to put down the phone and take the shot, I saw what looked like a homeless person out of the corner of my eye in the parking lot. I turned to look, but whoever it was had gone, and John's shit box on wheels and future tomb stood in its place. Jim was walking through the door and looked like he was about to collapse. He was holding a paper baggie to his chest tightly, so I guess John fronted him again after all. John was staring at him from the car with a look of concern before driving off. I told Jim about the call, and he seemed to brighten. I came up to his desk with the pretense of paying him for the drugs I took. Not that he ever paid me back for the drugs he bummed. And on closer inspection, the man looked like shit. I couldn't tell if he was drunk or not, but he kept slurring his words, and his skin looked disgusting, like he hadn't bathed in months. He excitedly called Miss Winters, promising her that he would be there pronto with Brandon in tow. I didn't say anything when he referred to Brandon as his employee, but normally we joked around about the HR structure and importance of the shell companies we used. After he got off the phone, he ran to the bathroom to throw up, which instantly put me at ease. He must just be wasted. Brandon called then and told Jim to meet him at the house, and that he would drive him back. Which was great, because I suddenly didn't want to lend him my car. That, and it would be funny to see the look on some poor Uber driver's face when coming to pick him up. It really was. Once again alone for the rest of the day, and having already completed a decent enough quota of ripping off innocent people and hating myself that week, I planned my morning. I decided I had worked hard enough passing that message along and opted for substance abuse. Also, some food from the Haitian place next door, which thankfully opened early. I started with vodka and a little diphenhydramine, and followed it with weed, but I couldn't find the Ritalin. So I ended up passing out again. This time, there was no scary homeless man, but I vaguely recall a dream about Palm Beach, but without any buildings at all, and something horrible happening to an innocent woman in the scrublands. The only thing I clearly remember was a desperate cry for help from a beautiful and mournful voice, turning into a ragged scream of rage, and feeling like my heart would be pushing the edges of a heart attack if it struggled to beat any faster. When I woke up, it was almost 5. I briefly congratulated myself on the day well spent, before wondering where my coworkers were. I left Brandon's office to find them both in the main area of the tiny storefront office, sprawled haphazardly on the larger, nicer couch we supposedly reserved for customers. Jim had looked pretty rough in the morning, but now, the man looked like he had liver damage. Both of them looked like they were a little too ripe in both hygiene and age. They smelled like they'd used bonfire ash for cologne. I was alarmed, but told myself that they just needed to be more careful, because their skin looked dry and brittle. The crow's feet around their eyes had shrunk their talons in, and their sickly schemes seemed to sag. Jim was utterly passed out, but one of his eyes was still slightly open, and I saw a crack of yellow. His hair looked thinner in the corners of his forehead and on the top of his head. Brandon was half unconscious next to him, cradling a precarious glass of mango juice that had thin brown veins of whatever he poured in still visible, and muttering incoherently. He didn't seem to be enjoying it much, and there was no longer condensation on the glass. He stirred awake when I came out and said something I couldn't understand twice, repeating himself in an antagonized tone at me. The third time seemed to be a charm. Check the con rack. As a Floridan, I speak fluent drunk and got his meaning. He tried to use his hands to steady himself on the wood armrest as he attempted to exit Jim's company. One of his nails snapped off, and a little bit of blood puddled up. He looked at it with surprise before pointing to the desk next to him, where a pile of loose papers sat. I grabbed the papers as he began to nod off. First on the stack was his own contract, which was boilerplate and, aside from the shitty handwriting, looked fine. He was offering her practically nothing, and potentially less if there was, as of yet, unseen need of repairs. The second, much neater and staple pile was clearly from Miss Winters. I hadn't bothered to read it before, but was surprised at how organized it was, mentioning all 3 of us, but with my name crossed out. I wasn't unhappy to see that. The contract dictated the times they were supposed to come by, and also included a non-disclosure agreement that covered anything discussed in the home. It seemed legit to me, except for the lack of a notary signature. Ms. Winter's signature was an incredible work of calligraphy, and a sticky note on the top of her pile happily exclaimed that she would be willing to sign off if they showed up tomorrow morning at the crack of dawn again. A handwritten letter, or at least the attempt of one, was below it, but it made no sense at all. There were clear attempts to spell things, including my name in one case, but most of it looked like random letters and handwriting of decreasing quality. Ms. Winters had signed this as well, with her flawless signature, below 2 indiscernible lines of scribble that looked like attempts at signatures. I tried to wake the guys up and ask if they were alright and to gauge the situation, since I assumed they got her to sign this while they were wasted in her home. Both stared at me with irritated looks before quickly falling back into sleep. They were stirring slightly by the time I left, which made me feel slightly better about leaving them alone, I had some unremembered nightmare when I slept that night and woke up in a state of incredible anxiety. I had gotten a text from Brandon overnight, but it was pure gibberish and he didn't respond to any of my texts back. I decided to go to work early in case they needed my help. I figured by 9 or so they would have been long gone, even if they were hungover or wrecked again. 9 and then 10 rolled along, without a sign of them or a text in response to my questions about how they were holding up. At about 10:30, I was getting really worried when I got a call from Ms. Winters. "Good morning, darling." She practically sang into the phone. I was overwhelmingly relieved until she told me that they had never shown up. I instantly didn't believe her. She sounded like she was ready to laugh, and there was a disinterested tone in her voice when she faked concern as to what might have happened. She asked if I would like to finish things up with her, and I declined as quickly as I could. I felt the same way I did when my computer was acting up, with one thing going wrong after another, but I just didn't want to admit that there was a serious problem. I politely but quickly got off the phone, which she seemed to think was funny. I was pretty careful that day not to take any drugs that would put me to sleep. I left around 3, sober as a judge and shaking like a defendant. I couldn't really sleep that night and couldn't kick the feeling that something was worse than wrong. Just in case the police got involved, I sent texts to people who knew them but didn't give a shit, exclaiming that they hadn't shown up and I thought they were ditching me. Thank God no one cared. It'd be enough if someone asked me why I didn't bother calling the cops if I happened to never see them again. I don't know why I did this, but at around 5:30, when morning was just announcing itself with vivid ribbons of tangerine and pink in the sky, I decided to stop by Ms. Winter's house. I steeled myself for it in the same way I steeled myself against the creeping feeling that I was close to an overdose, which had happened once in a while. I took deep breaths with a second or two in between to avoid hyperventilation and concentrated on one task after another so I wouldn't flip out. Shower, clothes, shoes, wallet, car, address. I shook when I thought of the last one, but I had to do it, to see if Brandon's car was there or something. I prayed he'd just text me back and tell me to fuck off, but he never did. I got into my car and tried to improve my mood by blaring the happiest music I could find, which just made it feel all the more alienating. When I got there, I didn't see a single person. The sky was still mainly black, but the ribbons of light had turned into long, bright gashes across the sky of yellow, pink, and blue. I pulled up to the beautiful little home, but didn't see Brandon's truck or any lights on. I sighed deeply and prepared to move on, when a knock on the window opposite of the house prompted me to almost shit my pants. I almost jumped over to the passenger seat, but when I looked over, I only saw a beautiful, young set of breasts hidden behind a tight gold blouse when I looked. I looked out the window to get a better view as I rolled down the window, only to stop halfway in shock. It was Mrs. Winters, but she was stunning. She didn't look like she was a day over 18, and that she could cause traffic accidents until she was well into her 50s. I gawked as the young girl snickered at me. "You decide you want my little old house after all?" Her voice sounded so clear and crisp. It was as if it had been mastered by some musician with genuine talent before being put back into her vocal cords. Her sudden loss of at least 50 years didn't seem to bother her. I stared at her for a moment. No, ma'am. Didn't like the job to begin with. Just stopping by to make sure everything's all right. She tilted her head back and laughed deeply. I was paralyzed by fear. Oh, I'm ma'am now? Well, you take care now. Be a real shame if you started acting more like your friends and all. Her alluring voice had a mirthless tone despite her genuine sounding laughter. Yes, ma'am. I said this as I slammed my car into reverse and tried to speed away from her down the one-way street I had come. She stood in the middle of the street, her hands on her hips and a defiant but dazzling smile on her face. As I scraped another car in my attempt to get around the corner I had turned off of. As I pulled away, I gave her one last look and saw what for a second looked like Brandon's clothes on a man standing in the shadow of her house, right where the crackhead had previously disappeared to when we first arrived. I had to act normal. No one would believe me if I told them I had worked with Mrs. Walker and she had lost a few years. Worse yet, if the investigation did involve her, I had no idea if she would take that personally. I did not want to see that beautiful face ever again. I decided to do the only thing I could do. I waited until just before 9 and I headed to work. It wasn't until the second day that the police decided to pay me a visit. It took about 7 hours of hardcore interrogation, which I was very open during. I told them which drugs I had, where I had gotten them, when they went missing. But they didn't tell me anything. And they took an interest when I said they looked sick, but nothing else seemed to grab their attention. Finally, a younger Asian guy in a clean-pressed blue suit appeared in the room where I was being questioned. He looked deeply frustrated and more than a little angry to me. Rather than say anything at first, he just plopped a manila folder in front of me. In it were pictures of 2 partially scorched corpses sitting in an SUV with their eyes raggedly cut from their sockets. Thanks to the burned tatters of cloth, I still recognized them as Brandon and Jim. I vomited almost instantly, which seemed to surprise the Asian guy. "They're dead?" I asked with genuine shock. He confirmed that they were. Despite everything, a big part of me was hoping they actually did ditch me, and maybe Mrs. Winter's daughter was fucking around with my paranoia. After I'd rinsed the vomit from my mouth, the guy seemed more inclined to feel bad for me. They let me go a few hours later, but told me not to leave the area, and that I wasn't getting my computer or phone back. I nodded, still in shock, and left. It took another night and a hidden vial of edazolum to finally go to sleep again. When I did, I heard screaming in the night again. In the scrubland, a young Mrs. Winters was wearing an old canvas dress that looked like it was from a pretty damned long time ago. It was pitch dark, aside from the light from a cooking fire, and she was being brutally raped by 3 men in old-time clothes and leather hats near that small fire. I screamed something, but no one seemed to see or hear me. I felt uncontrollably pulled towards the event, and even stepping backwards did not stop my feet from slowly being dragged forward. I watched helplessly as she clawed at the eyes of the attacker currently on top of her, causing them to break out into anger. The man was badly injured, but could clearly still see because he picked up a knife off the ground and motioned to his friends to hold Mrs. Winters down. The young girl screamed desperately, as the bleeding man proceeded to cut out her eyes and tongue, to the horror of even his friends. He then dragged her and forced what was left of her beautiful face into the fire. It left an irritation, as if the still barely living girl was nothing more than a frustrating, broken tool that had to be left behind. When I awoke, the smell of smoke lingered, whether it was my imagination or not, for weeks.